I must say that I feel doubly honored this evening. In the first instance, I felt honored when the compilers of this marvelous book, which we are here to launch, found it fitting to ask me to contribute a chapter to the Thabo Mbeki I know. Secondly, as I stand here before you, I am further humbled to have been asked by the Thabo Mbeki Foundation to deliver this evening's keynote address. Even at the tender age of 90, I marvel at what rich lessons history has to offer, particularly to our youth and emerging leaders. The establishment of the Thabo Mbeki Leadership Institute, as an example, prioritizes the development of a pipeline of leaders and provides an excellent opportunity to glean expertise and experience from those who have traveled the road before them. As a public figure and inspiring leader, Mr. Mbeki, cognizant of the fact that the new republic is not a restricted single geography, the new public extends beyond one's country, our Africa. In my own chapter, I have endeavored to underscore Thabo Mbeki's critical and quite sensitive role in helping us in Botswana to help the ANC and other freedom fighters in the region at a time when I and my countrymen were very much living in the shadow of the apartheid. Over the decades, it is both remarkable and a privilege indeed that I have had the opportunity to interact and engage with Mr. Mbeki, and also with Mr. Mbeki within the context of liberalization struggle, South Africa's first democratically elected administration, his presidency, and most recently in his post-presidency. I have just noted, I first got to know about Mr. Mbeki within the context of the liberation movement in South Africa Western Africa, Eastern Africa, and Northern Africa, it was apparent that the liberation movement were necessary to gain freedom and independence. Liberation struggle is therefore a broad-based African experience. Half a century ago this year, when we reclaimed Botswana's independence as a sovereign republic of Botswana, it was poor, landlocked, just over 500,000 people. Back in 1966, surrounded as we were on all sides by racist oppression, then lacking even an army of our own, our capacity to support the regional liberalization struggle faced genuine constraints. Which was then still a British protectorate, with the ultimate goal of reaching Tanganyika. I'm afraid I apologize for that. I apologize for that. When you are my age, when I are my age, certain things should be overlooked. I'm afraid those who have tried to help me also made matters worse.
Page 7, Excellency. Go on page 7. No, 19, and then this year, an order.
Okay.
Yes. Given the precarious status of the country, page 7.
Well, I hope we have suggested what I've said. At a dinner like this, all menu is not served at the same time. It's all given in appetizing bits. Given the precarious status of our country at the time, this was not an easy task for us if we openly allowed, no, I realize I've been led into temptation.
tlhake. Gore ga re tswa mo go-
My daughters had encouraged me when I left home that I shouldn't read a speech. I should just talk. But you know, officials always want to lead you away from the family in order to establish their they're needed.
Yeah, it's okay. The numbers are that important.
The page I've lost is that even with the help from my daughter, yeah. Page 4.
Page 4. She took the other pages, so it might be gone.
Yeah, no, that's it.
There we go. There we go. There we go. That's page 4. Take that out on the way. That's page 4.
Yeah.
Got it? Then continue.
Yeah.
These ones are clipped, they're in order. So it's Malawi page 4. This is 11. This is page 11. He's got it. He's got it. So it's a different page. Two snips of that. Okay. We're ready.
Shall we start again?
Yes.
You see, once you are a president, you like to do things your own way. You don't get instructions. Back in 1966, surrounded as we were on all sides by the forces of racist oppression, then lacking even an army of our own, our capacity to support the struggle, the regional liberation struggle, faced genuine constraints. This is a factor that many people don't realize, not even in Botswana, that we recognize we're an African country. We recognized we had to play a part on the struggle, but we didn't have the resources that other people had, especially an army. But we had a moral responsibility to set on the borders with South Africa to prove wrong their the basic of their philosophy of apartheid, that black people cannot run a democratic, non-racial democratic state. And we thought that it would take away from any argument that they could produce to do that. So we had to use the tool that we thought we were capable of using. Yet, notwithstanding, our practical limitations, we were determined to fulfill our moral responsibility to serve as a true frontline state by assisting our brothers and sisters to the greatest extent possible. In keeping with our known long-standing norms, as well as international expectations, in the beginning, this meant upholding our status as a safe haven for all the brothers and sisters who fled oppression, including those who arrived on the path of taking up arms struggle. An important turning point in this respect involved Thabo Mbeki. As I note in my chapter, back in October in 1962, Thabo led a group of fellow students into Botswana, which was then still a British protectorate, with ultimate goal of reaching Tanganyika, now Tanzania. The party initially traveled overland. Unfortunately, they, along with my homeboy, the late Fish-Jitsing, were detained shortly after they reached southern Rhodesia and now Zimbabwe. After some unpleasant weeks in detention, they were eventually put on a Rhodesian railway, a train bound for South Africa, passing through Botswana. At the time, Rhodesia Railway track was owned by the Rhodesians. But before their departure on this potentially perilous journey, they were, however, able to get word of their predicament to a former classmate of mine named Mutsamai Mpo, who, like Fish-Jitsing, had been among the ANC treason trialists. Mpo then managed to successfully mobilize people in Palape, a stopping point along the line of rail, to demand that the British administration allowed the entire party to disembark at Palape Station rather than proceeding to Mafeking. In this way, one can see that ordinary Botswana already began to assert their sovereignty in solidarity with their fellow South Africans during the waning years of the protectorate. I personally began to know Thabo Mbeki some years later, in 19 70, when our relationship with the ANC reached another turning point. And I dare say, a very important turning point. Now acting as the secretary of to Oliver Tambo, it fell upon Thabo Mbeki to play a key role in pressing the liberation movement's request that the MK be allowed to transit through the now independent Botswana. Given the precarious status of our country at the time, this was not an easy matter for us. If we openly allowed the MK to use our country as a base, it would provide a pretext for the apartheid regime to move against us. At the time, we frankly felt out of contribution to the region, as well as ourselves, would be to continue to progress ourselves as a benchmark of non-racial democratic development, while continuing to provide a sanctuary to our refugees. But combining as he did then, and indeed now, with great tact and passion, Thabo Mbeki was not someone to be easily dismissed. In the end, as I detail in the book, we were able to come up with a plan based on the principle of, if you can come through in a way that we cannot see you, if you can come through in a way that we can not see you, then we will not have seen you. In other words, an arrangement of don't ask, don't tell, and don't let anyone else openly see you. When on occasion the comrades were, however, seen by others, thus putting all parties at risk, we would sometimes have to fall back on our own rules about carrying weapons of war. Such prosecutions usually ended with a behind-the-scenes presidential pardon and return up north. What I wish to stress here is that the subtle approach we adopted would not have worked in the absence of subtle, determined enablers. From the ANC side, the enabler, my colleagues in Botswana and I knew and appreciated most were Oliver Tambo and Thabo Mbeki. Ladies and gentlemen, it would be remiss of me if I didn't acknowledge that we are indeed launching a remarkable book about a truly remarkable man this evening. My own modest contribution is but a chapter in a multi-authored tome that brings adverse and unique perspectives to the ongoing and uniquely diverse career of one of Africa's true statesmen. While celebrating a life, this is a volume that, moreover, does not skirt a controversy. Contentious issues from across the Thabo Mbeki's long career as a political leader from the time of the liberation struggle through his presidency are addressed with refreshing depth of analysis. In the end, the faith that so many distinguished authors from both outside and inside South Africa have each made their separate contribution to this book is each made a separate contribution to the book is also a powerful tribute to the subject. In fact, last night we had a dinner and we were introduced, we had a table where some of the authors were, and we found that hardly any two people knew each other. So that we're all contributing, making a contribution about the Thabo that we have not concerted to come together to try to say, let us bring him up as a good man or a bad man. Leaders rose to the occasion as a result of the struggle. Leaders rose to the occasion, resolute with the hearts of lions and the determination to fight for their respective countries, emancipation and independence. This is the Thabo Mbeki that I know and the Thabo Mbeki that I'm sure you will need to read about through the pages of this story. As a side, I've always thought that if Thabo Mbeki had not been grabbed by politics, he would have been a professor. He has all the attributes. He's articulate and well-read, curious, and of course, you can't forget the gray hair. I urge you all to read the Thabo Mbeki I know and get to know Thabo from different perspectives. In fact, last night, somebody suggested that from now on, the book should be entitled The Thabo Mbeki We Know. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, let me say that the volume being launched tonight is both a record of the leadership of the African Renaissance figure, but also through him, our region's broader shared experience. Director of Ceremonies, if I were to pay a tribute to Thabo Mbeki, I have known I would most certainly need much more time and many more chapters. In Botswana would say, I would talk until cows come home. I would, however, it would be remiss if I failed to express the gratitude felt by fellow Africans, in particular, to former Thabo Mbeki, to former President Mbeki, for his passionate commitment to realizing not just the liberation of his own people, but of Africa as a whole. Turning to you, Mr. President, or former President Mbeki, say, tonight we are proud and united in our appreciation of both your wisdom and deeds. You are indeed an African among Africans. You did say in Parliament some years back, I am an African. You have truly proved to be what you said you were, and even more than people would believe you would. In this spirit, sir, please accept these humble expressions of our admiration. God bless us all.
Your Excellency, Sir Ketumile, it is indeed we who are honored to have heard this very poignant and fascinating account of the Thabo Mbeki you know. We are grateful to you, sir, indeed, and to you and your generation for the courage and moral leadership which you have shown us as an African people. Sir Ketumile, thank you so much for honoring us with your presence tonight. His Excellency has given us a taste, a sampler, indeed, of the kinds of anecdotes and experiences that people of all walks of life have had with Thabo Mbeki. It's all contained in this book. You must grab a copy and read it. It is indeed very compelling, and there are lessons and experiences shared by other African leaders, people like Nigerians Olusegun Obasanjo, Ethiopia's Meles Zenawi. Really intriguing stuff if you're interested in the journey that we have taken as a continent. As Sir Ketumile rightly said, South Africa's liberation, I like the term you coined, sir, was a broad-based African effort. And sometimes we tend to forget, and thank you for that timely reminder this evening. You also mentioned the former president's grey hair, of which he has lots. Mr. President, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Beyonce. I'm just going to allow someone of a younger generation to explain the significance of what I'm about to say. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're tweeting tonight, the hashtag to use is Thabo Mbeki I know. Please go ahead and feel free to tweet. But there has been a very popular meme created on social media of you, Mr. President, based on Beyonce's latest album, Lemonade. Play it for you sometime, not sure how familiar you are. But it goes by Mbeki, hashtag Mbeki with the good hair. You better call Mbeki with the good hair, it says. Someone will explain the significance of that. Tonight is not that evening. I think I saw Ambassador Mabuza make her way in. Indeed. Ambassador, as we had said, this was her brainchild. And we will allow her now to say a few words as to what motivated and inspired this particular thought. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Lindiwe Mabuza, former South African ambassador. Please give her a warm round of applause.
It's amazing to see all these wonderful, familiar, old and new faces. Mr. President, and Your Excellencies, other presidents who are present, Mrs. Zanele Mbeki, distinguished guests. As you can tell, I'm a bit nervous. President Mbeki put me on many stages around the world to talk about our country, but tonight I find it difficult to talk about why this book. Well, I was instructed by our CEO, the CEO of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, may I say our Commander-in-Chief, that I should explain why this book. It's simple. Why? It's because It was an idea whose time had come. Why? Because there are many Thabo Mbekis out there, vilified, misrepresented, until we who know him don't even find him in the pages. And so it was necessary to put before the people of the world the real Thabo Mbeki. What's an all president? In this book, we only asked of the prospective writers that they give us their recollections of President from having interacted with him on any capacity. What has come out is beyond our wildest dreams. We have a monumental document. The book records analytically the histories, and the very essence of being of our president by many who know him well. Most of the contributors had a front row seat or walked side by side with him in the various theaters of our world as the entirety of his life was being played out up to the very summit, and then the unspeakable abyss. Of Polokwane, we can only say he came to his own, and his own received him not. That's straight from the Bible. As we read through the pages, and as we contemplate the 15-year tenure of Thabo Mbeki as Deputy President and as President, minus, of course, the 7 months rudely deducted from by the coup, we might be inclined to agree with Charles Dickens when he says, in A Tale of Two Cities, those who know it can join in. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was an age of wisdom, it was an age of foolishness. It was an epoch of belief, it was an epoch of incredulity. It was a season of light, it was a season of darkness. It was a spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. End of the quote. But then I know that as we are assembled here, our resolve is there. And that is, the best is yet to come. Today we are already witnesses to the energetic, multifaceted engagements of Chief since he left government. The phoenix will always rise and soar higher and higher. That is Thabo Mbeki. The Thabo Mbeki I know is a rare, precious stone. We thank all the authors for shining the light on many facets of Chief. His brilliance, compassion, sensitivity, warmth, a sense of humor, principledness, his indestructible love for Africa and Africans, his caring for oppressed peoples of the world, his humaneness, his thoughtfulness, his humility, the master teacher, the artist, photographer. I think I saw you painting in Zambia, President. A poet, his political acumen, and razor-sharp understanding of economy. We can go on and on. With this book, we can confidently claim that the psalmist in Psalm 118, we can confidently claim with him that the stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Finally, this book is about preserving memory for posterity. And memory is the parent to society, is the parent to our future, a parent to civilizations to come. I was also instructed by our Commander-in-Chief that my last sentence should be, we shall now begin the work on the second volume. And on Monday, I am compelled to start working on my contribution to the book, which is missing. I thank you all.
It's easier where there's stays. Thank you so much to the orator, the poet, the writer, the former ambassador, Lindiwe Mabuza. Please give a warm round of applause. And we applaud your initiative and your efforts in bringing us to this stage. I've got my own copy of the book right here. It really is so fascinating and intriguing and insightful in ways which I didn't even imagine. Max and I were speaking earlier in the week that one of the great things about having such a book and launching it this week in the presence of the former president is that he is here with us. We can have this archive and debate his legacy with him in our midst. It is a wonderful resource that we have before us. And all of these archives, all of this material will be available in various ways, as I said earlier, through this book, also on the website as well, for us to continue to debate and reflect upon. We are very fortunate to have this. Ladies and gentlemen, starters will soon be served. Just to tell you a little bit about what's going to be happening afterwards, we're going to be hearing from some of the contributors of this book in a panel discussion. They will be in discussion under this particular theme and speak to some of these questions. South Africa's negotiated settlement, was there another way out? Remaking South Africa from pariah state to rainbow nation in a country of two nations, Gear and I'm an African. And finally, under the topic, the African Renaissance Agenda. I will introduce the contributors and panelists after we've had our starters. So ladies and gentlemen, tuck in. Enjoy. Bon appetit. take on how they know Thabo Mbeki. Let me now hand you over to our facilitator of this panel discussion, another contributor, and of course someone who has worked closely with the former president as well, and that is Ambassador Juma Volta Mwapachu. He is Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Tanzania's permanent delegate to UNESCO, the third Secretary General of the East African Community. He was Tanzania's Ambassador to France between 2002 and 2006, Principal Foreign Service Officer serving in Ethiopia and India, and among his many academic accomplishments, Ambassador Mwapachu has authored and published over 52 academic articles and over 160 articles in Tanzanian newspapers on political and economic issues. So you have no doubt you will be in good hands. Let me introduce now his panelists. Please give them a warm round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Ambassador Ami Mpungwe, just by way of quick introduction, became Tanzania's first High Commissioner to South Africa, and he's also served as personal assistant to the President of Tanzania and as Director, Africa and Middle East. Please give Ambassador Mpungwe a warm round of applause. No stranger to our shores, Professor Alex Irwin. He, of course, was appointed Deputy Minister of Finance in 1994 and subsequently served as Minister of Trade and Industry and Public Enterprises until his resignation in 2008. Please give Professor Irwin a warm round of applause. Also on our panel this evening, Professor Patricia McFadden is a radical African feminist who's worked for justice, freedom, and lives of dignity for all people. She currently works as a scholar, writer, activist, and teacher at the Thabo Mbeki African Leadership Institute, otherwise known as Tamale, at the University of South Africa. Please give Professor McFadden a warm round of applause. Also joining our esteemed and distinguished panel is Professor Willie Esterhuizen, of course, a leading South African writer, philosopher, and intellectual who played a significant role in opening dialogue between the ANC and the apartheid government, which contributed to negotiations. Professor Esterhuizen, of course, is a very distinguished writer as well. Please give the professor a warm round of applause. Also on the panel, Ms. Gloria Serobe. She is a founding member and executive director of Wiphold and chief executive officer of WIP Capital, also has held several other senior executive positions around South Africa and serves on several boards, and of course a very key player in the South African empowerment space and is a key architect of women's empowerment in the South African business landscape. Please give Gloria, or Dumado, a warm round of applause. Our final panelist, certainly not least, Ambassador Anders Molander, is a retired Swedish diplomat. He last served as Sweden's ambassador to South Africa from 2005 to 2008. His career involved several earlier postings in Southern Africa, such as Dar es Salaam, Lusaka, and Pretoria, as well as Luanda, obviously steeped in Southern African and African matters. Professor Molander, please give him a warm round of applause. I now leave you in the most capable hands of Ambassador Mwapachu for that panel discussion. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Moderator. Excellencies, dear friends, first of all, let me acknowledge my gratitude to the Thabo Mbeki Foundation for including me in this very important historic event marking the launch of the Thabo Mbeki I Know book. So much has been spoken already about this book, and it's my privilege now to facilitate a roundtable or a panel discussion on some of the critical issues that arise out of this book, but also very much in the context of South Africa's own historical development since 1994, as well as the whole trajectory of African political economic development. We have a very distinguished panel, as we have just been told. The panel brings onto the table a diversity of views and insights based on the South African experience, but also from an outside South Africa perspective. I want initially to say that Ambassador Mabuza, you stole my introduction to this whole panel discussion, and I was looking at President Mbeki when I was mentioning that I had briefed the panel about Charles Dickens' observations of the French Revolution. And I think I saw President Mbeki noting that I think it was important that I do restate that particular parallel in order to start off this particular discussion, because really reading those introductory statements in this novel, A Tale of Two Cities, I thought that it offers the right kind of startup to the panel discussion. So let me repeat what Ambassador Mabuza had cited from Charles Dickens, that it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity, it was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. Now, those who would recall Thabo Mbeki's speech on the I'm an African, you remember that in that poetic expression, he did make reference to not winter of despair, but shadow of despair. And what I would like to ask the panel really is to open up with a few remarks on how could such parallel epitomize the South African experience that we have gone through since 1994. What Charles Dickens viewed from the French Revolution dimension, is there any parallel that we can draw from that in terms of what South Africa has gone through since 1994? And I will start with Professor Erwin.
Well, the first positive thing I can say is it's wonderful to be promoted to a professor. So they are the best of times. But I wonder if that wonderful opening isn't actually a description of most human activity. Revolutionary times tend to heighten it. And there's no doubt that in South Africa, we went through a revolutionary time. And on reflection, for most of us, I'm sure, when we think back, most of the great revolutions in the last 150 years have had ups and downs straight afterwards. So I would not want to be either too dramatic and hopeful or too pessimistic. If we think back to those last years of the struggle, for some of us and all of us that were in it, it was extremely painful. It was not always characterized by things that you would like to see in your life. It was violent, painful. There was exactly that mixture of horrible cruelty and amazing sacrifice and nobility. And I think the great achievement of the leadership of the ANC at that time was to have sufficient vision, clarity, humanity to make certain that the latent and clear, well, not latent, they were very overt, bad aspects of any society were unable to come to the fore. And I say that advisedly because, in fact, it was an extremely violent transition when you think about it. So, yes, I think that the danger we're in at the moment is precisely that we do not have a political party that is reasserting or taking us further in this cause of humanity. And really it's our job, all of us in this country, to reinvigorate our sense of vision, capacity, humanity. And for me, humanity is something a lot bigger than your own pocket or your own small bit of activity that you're doing. And what I value in the leadership I met, of which Comrade Thabo was the person I had most contact with, was precisely that they inspired us with a vision, but it was not a dream. It was based on an analytical understanding of history and a firm commitment to the nobility of the human spirit. We must find that again. Otherwise, this period we're going to be in will be quite dark for a while.
Can we get a view from an outsider, Ambassador, from really thinking from the Swedish angle and with your experience in Southern Africa as ambassador, looking into what has happened in South Africa, do you think that there could be a parallel that you could draw from what Charles Dickens expressed in A Tale of Two Cities?
Well, let me say first of all that I would like to object to be called an outsider. One of the achievements of, I was going to say this last, but since you provoked me, you said you were going to provoke me, I will say it now, that one of the achievements of Thabo Mbeki was to explain to all of us the cause that the ANC was struggling for, and to make us understand it so that we could support it and to build a trust. And he built the trust in so many people abroad, including in Sweden and including myself, that I wouldn't mind at all to be included in the I'm an African concept. I hope that will be accepted. But what I was actually thinking of first was to relate a story which at the time, to remind us where we come from or where South Africa comes from. At the time when it happened, and it's a true story, it was not laughable, it was actually quite sad. But I think when I tell it to you now, I expect you to laugh. And that is what happens sometimes in history. When I was in Stockholm in the 80s, and apartheid was its strongest, repression was very strong, there was also despair and in the air and so on. There was a person in the South African legation whose task it was to liaise with the Foreign Office, and usually we didn't receive people above his rank. And I was the right rank so that he could actually liaise with me. In other words, I hadn't risen very far at that time. And so he invited me for lunch, and we were both quite awkward because we were obviously more or less enemies politically, and it was not easy to talk. So he would start in the restaurant to order a bottle of wine, even though I protested I don't drink wine at lunch, usually. And he proceeded to almost finish that bottle, out of nervousness, I suppose. And then it happened after we'd met a couple of times that he became rather philosophical. And he looked at me and he said, I'd asked him before where he had served, and he'd only had one posting before, and that was in Botswana. So he was obviously rather inexperienced as a diplomat. So he said, do you know what, when he, in this philosophical mode, do you know what, Anders? When I was in Botswana, not Botswana, I'm sorry. When I was in Botswana, I met this African professor who was smarter than both you and me. You laughed. I thought so, but actually it's rather sad, because this, in his world and what he was taught and how he was grown up, there was something that wasn't right. You know, he was observing something that didn't fit his all of what he was doing and that he was working for. And so I don't know what happened to him later. I hope that if he were here, he would also laugh about that. But the point is, I need to remind South Africans, and I felt that when I came here as an ambassador also, of the achievements that you have made, and the book is about that. And Alec Irwin was saying also, reminding us of the violence in the transitional period, which was really very, very hard and very difficult. And you've come to the point where you are now. And I was asked if I may end by saying, I was asked very often when I came back from my posting as ambassador here, and after Polokwane, how should we evaluate that in Sweden? And people were saying, is this the end of the South Africa as we know and development as we know? Is it going to go down the drain? People were asking me those kinds of questions. And I said, I don't believe so, because the people who work here, the politicians, are such high quality. Their organization until then had proven to be very, very strong. The constitution is a very strong one, and the institutions are strong. And I'd like to believe that that is still the case.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll come to more detailed... Professor McFadden, give us some of your own perspective coming from your area of discourse as a radical feminist. I mean, how have you viewed the historical development of South Africa between 1994 and today in the light of what Charles Dickens describes in A Tale of Two Cities?
Yes, thank you. Let me situate myself in the region first, because I think as we sit here, each and every one of us brings a particular positionality that enhances the debate around what South Africa means to each of us, and also to the people of the continent and the region. And in my case, I lived in this region, born in a little feudal dictatorship called Swaziland, which is not funny, by the way, because it's a very repressive space and continues to be such. And we experienced, those of us who embraced the freedom of South Africa experienced the violence associated with anybody who dared to step outside the status quo of very narrow political definitions of obedience and conformity. And we lost many comrades in Swaziland, something that I think needs to be talked about, and something that can no longer be swept under the carpet as a diplomatic issue, because the people of Swaziland paid a high price for the belief that they had that South Africa would become a doorway to a different life for them too. Personally, from my youth, I was fascinated by the idea that people were taking up arms and fighting for freedom. And in South Africa, the struggle for South Africa was really my own, the nexus of my own life as I live now. That's why I declare myself as a radical feminist. This is the new struggle, the more difficult struggle, the struggle that we bring home about equality being more than just a declaration, that it has to translate into the lived realities in the most intimate ways. And for us as Africans, we have to, grasp this nettle and face the fact that all of our societies are deeply wounded and fractured. And it's because we treat each other unequally. In the most horrific and unimaginable ways, we commit egregious crimes against each other, and we declare that we love each other. So that contradiction for me reflects very much, in many ways, the contradictions that haunt South Africa today. That there is no distinction really between the private and the public, between who we are in the most intimate, private ways, and who we declare ourselves to be, or whom we imagine ourselves in becoming. And so the contradictions that are playing out in South African society today are linked in very intersectional ways with what has happened to our humanity. And the South African struggle was an important opportunity for those of us who live in the borderlands of South Africa, in the nether regions of Southern Africa, to imagine ourselves beyond the little limited despotic spaces and to become Southern Africans. So I declare myself a Southern African consistently, insistently.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Now that I'm on a roll.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Ambassador Mpungwe, now you have been a very keen observer from your diplomatic career in Lusaka as a young diplomat and then later as High Commissioner here in South Africa. Give us your perspective about what you think the state of South Africa is in since 1994.
Well, certainly there was a lot of excitement in 1994, as all of us, the successful transition to a democratic order here was a South African struggle, but it was also a collective African struggle and entire international community. So there was a lot of excitement. And indeed, that promise, the initial period, we really felt that the promise of delivering South Africa that will reconcile whatever happened in the past and that will put in place a socio-economic system that would transform the lives of its people, would move in the right direction and with the right speed. There was a lot of expectation. And the rest of us in Africa, we are really looking at South Africa for that kind of leadership, which it was rightfully providing. But then the events of the latter years, and I'm being very frank here, not because of my personal relationship with former President Mbeki or because dinner has not been served yet, that I should end my dinner. But indeed, and a lot of people in Africa, and personally, because a lot of friends, they associate me with South Africa. Some of them confuse me. And indeed, I'm South African. And then they say, what's wrong with your people there? I'm being absolutely frank. Outside in Africa, people say, what's happening? They don't understand. Well, there was a lot of expectation from new South Africa. And they've been disappointed. You've let them down. We hope there'll be time to recover that.
Thank you, Ambassador Mpungwe. Now, Madame Gloria, you've been spearheading the women movement as far as empowerment is concerned, and of course, Africa has always looked at South Africa, in terms of its model of economic empowerment, but we've never really understood the perspective of women empowerment as such. Now, can you also give us, your own impressions along the perspective of Dickens? Do you think that there is that element of despair, of disillusionment, or is there a more positive outlook as far as the women position in society and in the economy?
What is important for us is to remember that unfortunately by the time President Mandela remarried, he was already retired. And so our first experience of having a first lady was Zanele, and she hates the title, but that was our first experience, and we milked that thing, we hang on to it like even today. She's still here, she's our icon actually. And so what was not surprising for us is that President Mbeki seemed to feel strongly that if South Africa is going to move forward, the women must be at the center of that. And tried to translate this emancipation in many ways. And one of those strong ways, and there's many of them, but President Mbeki, in this room, your presidential working group for women is here. They're occupying 2 tables, if they can just shout. He put together the presidential working group for women, I think in his desperation to find traction, to move this thing forward. 58 organizations were tidily put together, from business, from NGOs, Girl Guides, Domestic Workers Union, Gender Links, Gender Commission, SAWID, everything was put in that body. And he gave us audience 4 times a year. So we had a day to ourselves with our president. 4 times a year. He would meet us at 8, and with lunch, he would stay until like 3, 4. Of course, his office people are in and out wanting to take him back to the office, but he could not have enough of us as well. But we were so excited about this, and we knew that it is not going to last for a lifetime. So we must treat it like there is no tomorrow. And so typical of women, we were specific about the things that we did with him. And so just to fast forward, while Pulukwan was raging out there, that presidential working group for women was launching the retirement fund for domestic workers, which the country does not have. It's a very difficult process. That was December 2007, I think. And then we also are working on the water and sanitation specifically because it's something that matters to women. And the intention was to place this program in front of him in end of September. By the way, we still have to deliver it to you because by the time we're ready to do this, we are no longer there. And the third thing, he actually asked us to do a summit for women to take a clean piece of paper and say, if it was up to us, what would be those priorities for South Africa? And we did that summit in November, long after I had left, we didn't mind. We did it, except we did not have anyone to submit it to. But that too is waiting, President Mbeki. You can take it to whatever offices it must be taken. So what I'm saying here is that the issue of women was not fluffy. It was substance, it was issues, it was hard work, and women actually appreciated that. And maybe we will find a moment next time to submit those reports.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, finally, Professor Willie, give us your perspective. Yes, please.
Let me say that transitions are not prayer meetings for church meetings. It's rough and very tough. Particularly transitions from countries which suffer from structural violence and physical violence. And South Africa was that kind of country. So it was rough and very tough. And you know, if you measure it, you can measure it, the success and the failure. And the first issue is really
do we experience a constitutional democracy which is widening and deepening? Now, why I support the patron, I call him Patron Thabo. He is actually the patron of peace in this country and also on the continent. Definitely. And one day I'll want to write a book about it, and also a book of the man with the pipe. I'll come to that later. But you know, I have it on very reliable grounds. Maybe it's not true, but I hope it is true. That when Mr. Gwedi Matashe went to the union buildings to tell him that his term is running out, then the patron told him how to do it constitutionally. Am I right? Now that is what leadership is all about. You play in accordance with the rules that has been negotiated. And that's why, and I give South Africa on that score at least 7 out of 10. The 3 that is missing is because now we have leaders that have to apologize that they didn't do the things according to the Constitution. Second is whether there is a visible creation of wealth in the country. Earned, not borrowed or stolen. Earned. And I think on that score, and Gloria is an example, and I wish that she's asked me to become the lead director in her company, but she didn't. But I think it is a success story. It's a lot of wobbles and so on, you will know, but I think in terms of from where we came from in the 80s, we've done quite well. The third one is whether we have succeeded in creating what is called social capital or social cohesion. Do we have some bonding social capital, bridging social capital, and stuff like that? And because I'm so old, in August I'll be 80. It's a terrible, terrifying experience. But I'm an advocate for social cohesion at the Department of Arts and Culture, and they're really trying their utmost to create what I call islands of social capital within a wide sea of huge waves, etc. And I want to commend them for doing that, because this is where we need to do something in the country. The fourth one is whether there is a real visible, the word I'm searching for is signs, visible signs, that there is an equalizing of the wealth that we're creating and opportunities, etc. And we failed dismally. The one thing that we did not succeed in, others also, South Africa, because of apartheid, suffered what I call a justice gap. And I can explain it in all sorts of manners, not necessary. That justice gap still needs to be addressed. Yeah. There is no peace anywhere in the world possible without doing something to the justice gap.
Professor, we'll come to greater detail. We'll come to greater detail about the negotiated settlement and to what extent.
I just want to conclude by saying something to the patron.
Yes. Yes, please.
He smokes a pipe, very important, because in peacemaking processes in old days, there was the smoking of the pipe. So smoke is a signal of peace. In our country, smoke has become a signal of violence.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed, panel, for those introductory remarks which have been overarching, really, in terms of, apart from the African Renaissance, but the first two topics really are more or less covered by your introductory remarks. But let's come to this this question of the negotiated settlement, and whether, there is a strong legacy out of it in terms of creating new hope for opportunities, for prosperity, for bridging the gap, which you've made reference to, for creating the conditions that support Ubuntu in South African society. Ambassador Mpungwe, what is your own perspective, your own impression about the negotiated settlement? Do you think that it has risen to the expectations of ordinary South Africans?
Well, given the violent history of South Africa, and then all of a sudden you have a possibility for negotiated settlement, and indeed it took place, and it took place very successfully. It shows that there is, within the violent history that Alec and the rest of us mentioned, within South Africa there's a huge potential to resolve issues in a very peaceful, in a very amicable way. And indeed that process went on very, 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 very smoothly and very successful. In fact, and this is in line with the occasion tonight, when President Mbeki, I think we met in June 1989, I had come from Namibia where we were going through the process of a transitional process for Namibia to brief both the government and the ANC delegation. When the ANC delegation briefed me on the possibility for the negotiated settlement, I almost didn't believe, because after going through a lot of uncertainties, and here is an opportunity to resolve the issue peacefully, and things moved very fast. From June to August, we had the Harare Declaration, and the process went on very successful. So the point is, I think South Africans can handle difficult situations very successfully, and that gives us hope. Even this atmosphere of uncertainty, yeah, I'm sure South Africans will be able to resolve it.
Professor McFadden, now there is this notion that there was too much compromise in the negotiated settlement, and that maybe at the end of the day, the price that was paid for that compromise, has been overbearing, overburdening for ordinary folks in South Africa.
Yes, I am of the opinion that too much was given away and too little was, gained. And, well, I come from a militant background where we identify inalienables. There are certain things that you do not compromise over. And one of them is your dignity in relation to a balance of power. Because how do you negotiate with a skewed balance of power? What is it that you give away so that you can convince yourself that you have balanced the scales of power? South Africa is a quintessential example of how, in my opinion, with all due respect, the price was higher than the product that was delivered. Because, and I say so because I'm an outsider, insider. I became part of the African National Congress in my teenage years. My teachers, South Africans, mathematician and a historian, basically drew us into the fold of the idea of freedom in South Africa. And, I moved ANC comrades in my little rat trap of a car for many years as an underground activist. We moved many AK-47s across the border. And we lost many comrades, but we also made sure that many comrades made it across. And so in many ways, we contributed to an ideal that people died for, that people were not compromising about. You know, and when you die, there's no half dying. You die. You live or you die. And bringing that kind of inalienability to the conversation about South Africa's future, I think got lost. In the moment where power was renegotiated, and like I say, you know, okay, in real politics, it's called pragmatism. But then, you know, what is it that we give our children for the future, to take with them into the future, so that they can solve the intractable problems that were not resolved by that compromise?
Thank you, Professor.
And I just need one
please.
more minute.
Please. Yeah,
because I think we need to be equitous also in terms of time distribution.
Okay.
So I'm going to take time.
Yes.
Because you give others more time.
Yes.
So the point I'm making is this. We have, and I don't like this expression, but I'm going to use it, we have to bite the bullet. Not only for South Africa, but for this continent. There's just too much compromising. It's a habit, an easy habit. And those who accede to power often have excuses and explanations for why the rest of the work cannot be done, the resources cannot be equitably shared. And you know, let's wait for 2060 or 2063. And the next time it will be 2020, whatever, 21, whatever. And you know, and the reality of it is that we are losing, rapidly losing the possibilities of transforming our continent into a place of well-being for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. Now, I think it's Aziz Bad in his contribution to the book, the Thabo Mbeki I Know, who has postulated that these criticisms about the compromises, I think he describes it as misguided criticisms, even though he goes on to point out that probably the disillusionment arises out of the lack of bold economic policies and measures, you know, having been taken. Now, Alec, you are very much part, you know, of that process of coming up with the right kind of economic policies that would mitigate the disillusionment or to raise the hopes of ordinary folks in South Africa. How do you view the negotiated settlement? What is it? What is the legacy as far as you're concerned?
I'll try and be extremely cryptic and brief, but for me the comparison, the question to be asked is, would we have got more for South Africa and our people if we had fought for longer? And I just want to remind us all, the civil war in South Africa started in 1986. Close friends of mine, shop stewards, were assassinated in Mpopomeni. The war escalated to a point where there were casualties, 25,000 officially recorded casualties per month. That was higher than Bosnia or any of those areas. The war then spread to the hostels here in KZN and spread to Boipatong. We started secret negotiations with Inkatha, I think Sid 86 or 87. We then attempted to set up secret meetings with Thabo and Minister Buthelezi. So we started negotiating long before. It got so violent that we set up peace committees across the breadth of KZN, the Cape, because Crossroads also blew up. And we then eventually in 1992 signed the National Peace Accord. Right, so we were negotiating as those of us on the ground, mainly the unions, were at the forefront. And Sid will bear me out with all the facts. We set up negotiating structures across the breadth of South Africa. And my view is that that was what saved us from a terrible, terrible bloodbath. What turned most of us? What turned most of us was a wonderful young woman shop steward working in a textile factory in Benoni was necklaced for completely false rumors that were actually, we discovered later, spread by the SB. We sat with Thabo, Steve Shweti, Aziz, in a hotel room at Pamozi Hotel. Because many of us at that time were of the view we should carry on fighting because we'll beat these buggers. So Nelly once gave me a brown packet with money in it, bought guns. But when those things started to happen, we could see that we were brutalizing our people. We were not civilizing anybody. So we, as the union movement, turned for the negotiations. OR, Thabo and others persuaded us. JZ persuaded us. Said, you're not going to win this fight. And we agreed. So that's the real question. Would we have got anything more if we had carried on? And we would not have. We would have brutalized the society.
Yeah.
Very quickly on the economics, I think we were naive, nice lefties. But what we were good enough to know was that you're not going to change an economy and the inequality in it overnight. It's a process. And the Economic Transformation Committee, Trevor, Tito, we were lucky to have Thabo as a good economist, and Madiba backed us always. We planned a program which we knew would take some years. We were out by 10 years. I'm sorry to say we were out by 10 years. By 2007, we had actually built a position where we had the funds to now really seriously try and address the position on the ground. That position, that moment escaped us. And we now have to go back and rethink. Because let me tell you, you will not have equality without resources. You will not have equality without local government institutions that are clean, efficient, and can do things. So we've got lots of building to do. And it's plain, bloody, hard work.
And we'll come to that point we'll come to that point when we discuss gear, as well as the reconstruction and development program. But I wanted to bring Professor Willie, because you were very much at the heart of the process.
I agree.
Now, just a minute. We in Tanzania we have a Kiswahili adage, which goes like yaliyopita sindwele tugange yajayo, which basically means let's not spend too much, thinking about the past, as long as it doesn't really debilitate our health. Okay, let us cure, or let's cure the ailments which now emerge. Yeah. So it's really a more futuristic perspective to dealing with fundamental issues that confront the ordinary lives, of your people. Now, do you buy that kind of a philosophy, as far as what some people see, as that the price was too much?
It was a compromise, but it was an inevitable compromise. And I think where it went wrong was when the clerk walked out of the government of national unity. Because governments of national unity is actually put into place to fix the sort of problems which were not fixed during the negotiations. I hope someone is not shooting at me with words. But you understand, and I know for a fact that President Mandela was very, very sort of disappointed about that, because that was the vehicle. I'm not going to say that that vehicle would have dealt with the issues that has been raised, and I don't want to quarrel with the guardian angel right at that side. And, you know, at my age, I avoid that sort of things. But I do understand why people feel that the compromise was really not the thing that should have been done. But it was there's now another history behind it, the government of national unity.
Yeah.
My view is, very quickly, is that the sooner we get business to understand the social responsibility and needs of people, the better. And if we can't deal with corruption, systemic corruption, as quickly as possible, and secondly, the hesitance of business to really say we will help to develop what the patron said, the developmental state. That is really the thing.
Okay. Now, let's move, to the next stage, which really flows from what we've just been discussing, and that is post-1994. The new leadership, democratic leadership, comes into the office, and they find the economy in a mess. The statistics show that as at 1994, the budget deficits were, just too high. Some people said that the government was bankrupt or the country was bankrupt at that time. And Madiba, Thabo, and the team, and I think Nkulu, Wiseman Nkulu, has reflected this in the book. And really the debate now revolved around, whether to go for the reconstruction and development program or undertake austerity measures which would sort of turn around the economy, develop the resource base, which would then go towards the financing. But it was a very difficult balancing act, wasn't it? And I don't know, Ambassador, do you really, you say that you're very much South African. Did you have any thinking from the Swedish government side, looking in, to see was the government really, because there was some criticism that this was a neoliberal agenda, maybe very much influenced by the IMF, World Bank, the Madiba government trying to secure aid from outside. Did you feel that way?
Well, let me say that we were observers to this process, and we were not trying to influence the South African government. I don't think we could have. We were indeed invited by the ANC as an incoming government during the process, the negotiation process, to finance and partly take part in seminars which the ANC had around such issues as how we're going to deal with the economy, how we're going to deal with what was then termed, I think, affirmative action, later became something else. And I was privileged, as I was stationed here then, to sit in on one of those seminars. I think it was the one on affirmative action. And true to what we have learned about the ANC in exile, and some of us who worked here by associating with the UDF, we had full confidence, and it was proven right, that the ANC had the approach to matters. They had cadres that were trained. They took advice where they thought they could find it by inviting experts, and we were very happy to be able to finance some of that. And I sat once after this seminar in a hotel room with some of the ANC leaders who were evaluating what they had just heard.
Yeah.
And just to give you an example, I think it was on affirmative action, and there was a lady from Malaysia had talked, and somebody from the United States on their programs for minorities and so on. And they very quickly established that our problem is unique. It's not, it's a majority which has to be taken care of, not a minority in this country in the first place. And so we must obviously rethink the thing and do our own thing.
Thank you.
And so this is what has happened, and we had the trust
in what the government was
exactly.
embarking
And I think, as Alec Erwin has just said, they have proven right, maybe a bit later than you thought. Yeah. But may I say another thing on the earlier issue on compromises? We think in Sweden that compromises is a Swedish art form. And so if you ask a Swedish person about whether it was right to compromise, they will obviously say yes. And I can't help thinking now, when I'm thinking about it, that to some extent maybe you were almost too successful in those negotiations, because after I left South Africa, I think it was, I was told that the once dominating party, the Nationalist Party, didn't exist anymore, and that the last politician had turned off the light and joined the ANC.
Gloria, you want to step in?
I think it is fair to say that they inherited a bankrupt state. And one didn't necessarily know as much about that until I became the finance director of Transnet in 1996. And for all the decisions that you see having been made, you actually see that while CODESA was happening and those conversations were happening, the parastatals were piling on liabilities into the balance sheets of theirs, which were state guaranteed. So the intention here truly was to make sure that it fails on day one. So Transnet was a big part of that. And I can say it with authority because I know all when the resolutions were made. To put, for example, T11 bonds into an illogical liability like that, into the Transnet balance sheet, which had the state guarantee. Transnet then was 85% geared. We couldn't even service our own debt. And on top of this, we could not do no investment program. And this is an entity which has got railways, has got airlines, has got pipelines, has got telecoms, the whole economy of the country. We couldn't do nothing about investments. Yeah. And the more critical thing about this was if we did default just once, there were cross defaults across the country by Telkom, by Eskom, and so on and so on. And cross defaults meant the state must respond and settle early. The government could not be able to settle all those debts. So that was really the big plan. And so our mandate to go to Transnet was to fix up this mess, which if I knew before I went, I wouldn't have gone. But it took us 4 years to do this. Most important, and this is where President Mbeki comes in, is that it was very important as the executives that we are talking with a state which is consistent, which is sophisticated about this, which is predictable, and it helped that it was an office loaded with professionals. We didn't like Mjango, but legal mind there, Professor Nkutlu or Maus Mwasheng, economists, people who understood this crisis with us. Yeah. And so when we solved it by 2000, Transnet balance sheet went to being 50% geared, and by the way, the state itself became a BBB plus rating by the credit rating agencies. So I think for me, the important thing is that coming back to the compromise, and I think the professor has a view on that. I guess I'm married to 30 years, and that's all I do, compromise every day. Still there, so maybe it's a second life to me. The important thing is what to do with this power post that. Yeah. And the lever to change this country is sitting all over government. It is doable. It's too early for us to be corrupt yet, because there's a lot to be done. And it has got to be done with all the integrity in the world, because you are dealing with a very sophisticated apartheid economy problem, and the attention to detail is required to deal with this. We cannot afford to be mushy-mushy about it. So I think it will be the last time I say something nice about President Mbeki, but it helped to have a head of state who understood that crisis.
Thank you, Gloria. But then, Erwin, I mean, the South African economy now is in poor shape. And I think Gordon mentioned this in his budget, that the South African economy was in a crisis. And if you look at the GDP determinations now, you know, they're pretty low. Nothing really to write home about in terms of addressing, you know, the challenges of inequality. They say South Africa now is probably one of the most unequal countries in the world. So are we moving backwards? What is actually being done under this particular regime to change course and give hope, you know, to the people of South Africa?
Well, Ambassador, I promise you I'll be very brief in my anecdote, and then answer your question. I was watching these Brexit people in the UK trying to explain the economic policy, and it reminded me of an occasion. Trevor Manuel and I went on what they call road shows to raise capital, and we were trying to raise the first 10-year bond for, and all these investment houses used to hammer us. What's your exchange rate policy? What's your deficit policy? All of this. And we would try and mumble along, but we sounded like these Brexit guys. Yeah? not very convincing at all. So we came back and we said, no, this is nonsense. We better have a proper macroeconomic policy that actually explains technically to investors what are we trying to do with our price levels, our interest burden, our deficit, etc. That's the origin of GEAR, and certain others will bear this out. We debated that endlessly in the '97 conference. But frankly, looking back, it was very important, and this is where I come to answer your question. I am convinced in my mind that what we did to stabilize the economy in those early years, and even get to a primary surplus by 2007, was fundamental. If we had not done that, our current economic position would be completely and absolutely disastrous. Because we actually are doing quite well. If I look at unfortunately, all the African economies I deal with are in an extremely serious structural problem, because they have no resources, no macro stability, and worse still, no infrastructure. We've got infrastructure, we're not managing the best it is, but we've got it. So we mustn't see ourselves as in a disastrous situation. Are we going forwards? No, unfortunately, we're going backwards. Because we are not clear enough in what it is we want to do. We're mismanaging too often the state corporations by vacillating our policy and changing. But really, South Africa's position is far better than most.
Erwin, I've got to stop you because I think we're getting short of time, and I really want to come.
So invest in South Africa.
Let's wrap up our discussion now on the African Renaissance agenda, and really to underscore one major point, and I think it arises out of Thabo Mbeki's own definition of what he thinks African Renaissance is all about. It's the rediscovery of the African people, who they are, you know, what they have been and what they really want to become. And I know reading Meles Zenawi's contribution in the book, I think he really captures the underlying ethos of African Renaissance. Because, and this is really subject to debate here, you know, Zenawi doesn't think that this is not about, you know, NEPAD and CAPAD and whatnot. It's about transforming the mind of the African. And I wanted to start with you, Mpungwe. You know, I mean, do you support Mbeki and Zenawi that African Renaissance starts and basically ends with transforming the mind of the African, because everything else really flows, you know, from there. What Africans are really going to do to create a more robust economy, to have better governance, to have free movement of people, not to have xenophobia, which we've experienced in South Africa. We've experienced it also in Tanzania in 2003, when the government threw out people of Rwandan origin. So xenophobia is not just in South Africa. We've seen it even in Nyerere's country, where refugees from neighboring countries were actually given citizenship, but now they're being thrown out of the country. What is your perspective on this?
I think Zenawi's reading is correct because, and this is at the core of the nationalist struggles and Pan-Africanist struggles in Africa. It was not just a matter of getting independence from colonial powers or dismantling racism and apartheid. It was creating a new hope, a new life for Africans. So I think it's quite a deeper philosophy than a mere
putting things like NEPA,
yeah.
APRM.
No. I mean,
Yeah.
NEPA, those are the components that will deliver the continent, will deliver Africa to the level that we intend to become. So at the core of the nationalist and Pan-Africanist struggles was the transformation of the entire outlook of the continent, and given the resources that we have, to make Africa occupy the rightful role that it deserves in the global settings.
Yeah. Professor McFadden, give us your perspective about the African Renaissance.
Yes, I absolutely position myself in the idea of a renewal of the continent. And I do agree that, retrieving the love for ourselves as Africans and recognizing that we come, first of all, we are the first humans. This is the place where we stood up and took the first step forward as humans. And we have to retrieve that. And then we must have the courage. The very courage that enabled humans to stand up and walk forward is the courage that we need to find ourselves again. South Africa and all the countries of this continent have to find ourselves. And in that, we can actually solve the problems around the state. The state is just a mechanism that humans create. It's not some deity that drops from the sky, but it has been so reified and become so inaccessible, for the very functions that humans invented it historically. It was meant to serve everybody. It now serves 1% of the population of the planet. So we have to take the state back, and it must serve everybody. Equally. Not in terms of some people being the greediest, on the greediest index in the world and the rest of us being the poorest. But really, that redistribution requires that we bring courage, particularly to the mistakes or the compromises that were made in the past.
Thank you.
So it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity. It's not a crisis.
Thank you, Professor.
It's an opportunity.
So many other issues about illicit financial flows, which President Mbeki, has been very much, the leader, the driver of that whole movement. There's so much about leadership, African leadership. To what extent, do they really embrace the whole ethos of Pan-Africanism, of African Renaissance, beyond the mere romanticism, of the idea, and really translating it in terms of ingraining, in the African populace, that this is what really constitutes the liberation of the African mind, and driving and using it to drive forward African integration as well as African prosperity. We could talk a lot more about this subject, but we are constrained by time. I want to thank the panel very much for your contribution, and a round of applause. Thank you. With the last word.
Because I insisted.
No.
Because I'm
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could also please give a warm round of applause to our facilitator, Ambassador Mwapachu. Excellent. So, while our panelists make their way off the stage, if I could please ask our esteemed panelists to speedily make their way off the stage. They can network later. Dinner will be served shortly. However, we have a program to proceed with. Thank you so much. And we are ever so grateful for your fantastic contributions and insights